Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical trivia and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This episode, Covenants are perfect places for mass hysteria. Mass hysteria, for the purposes of this podcast, refers to manias in which groups of people all begin to exhibit shared physical or psychological symptoms for which there's no direct cause. The earliest recorded are the dancing manias which swept mythic Europe. Mass hysteria is poorly understood, but documented cases have several factors which align, with a striking congruence, with the life of companions in Ars Magica campaigns. Mass hysteria is far more common in groups that live separated from the rest of society. Most covenants are physically separate because large numbers of believers in the divine dim the ability to cast magic. There is also a social distancing in being coven folk. Many have fled from feudal society and live outside the understood confines of the three estates. It's interesting to wonder whether the Order of Hermes harbours any culturally bound illnesses. Culturally bound illnesses are illnesses, that is, they are suffered by people, but they are psychological in character, although they are interpreted by their sufferers as physical. A particularly notorious example are the men in Western Africa who believe that their genitals can be shrunk or stolen by witches. These men are completely sincere in their belief, and many are completely sincere in the belief that they have suffered at the hands of these witches. However, only people from their cultural group ever suffer this affliction. Similar afflictions are found around the world, including in Western culture. All incidents of mass hysteria occur in communities under stress. That stress can be economic, but also includes social change and disasters. Covenant life is meant to be a respite for adventuring, for magi, but it isn't a respite from danger. There's a reason most magi live in castles. Mythic Europe is a dangerous place, and sometimes the thing that wants to kill you is on the other side of a stone wall, only a yard thick. It is interesting that one of the few methods of successful non-drug treatment in the real world, that is, a treatment which speeds up the rate at which the mania diminishes, and most of them burn out on their own, is to reduce the stress on the individual. And, in at least one example, this was done by encouraging people to drink alcohol and dance. Now, this sounds like a fair appropriation. Outbreaks often occur in people who have little social standing. There's some debate here as to if the condition usually appears in people who have substantial rank and then flows down into the lower strata of society. That being noted, companions live in a feudal society, the magi are on top, they are not. Outbreaks of mass hysteria occur in populations which skew female. I know how sexist that sounds, but the data is in on that one, I'm afraid. In small covenants that keep to traditional gender roles, when the magi leave with their shield grogs, the population skews to female. Mass hysteria, in slightly later than the game period, was often seen as a form of spiritual possession caused by fairies or demons. There is one story of an outbreak which started when a nun ate a small demon that was sitting on a lettuce leaf, a fact which came to light when the demon was exorcised and complained at his mistreatment. In Ars Magica, fairies are made out of stories. They are drawn to the emotional vitality expressed when people respond to the story's content. Now, if a person feels they've been bitten by a bug and becomes dizzy and faints, and the people around them also start feeling a little bit nauseous and think that they too have been bitten by this bug, and this is based on a real case far later in an American factory, eventually a fairy is likely to appear that has the characteristics of the bug that is expected. This means that in Ars Magica, the effect can create its apparent narrative cause. Wise characters could use this to their advantage if they find, for example, that they have something similar to the Junebug mania, that members of their covenant are falling ill, and that a small fairy has appeared to take responsibility as the proximate cause. They could sap that fairy's powers by passing around the story that, having been bitten by the Junebug and suffered the unpleasant side effects, the people afterwards gain some sort of useful power, like the ability to see fairies, the ability to see in the dark, an extended lifespan. The fairy, to keep the story going, would be forced to grant those virtues, emptying out its fairy might pool. This ties in with the idea of the tulpa, which is an idea that appears in some schools of Buddhism. Tulpas have, in a sense, already appeared in Ars Magica. The idea is that in some schools of Buddhism, you create your own demons. They represent your own spiritual impurities which you need to overcome to reach enlightenment. House Kriyaman, which is into Greco-Buddhism, has things like this called adulterations, which are created by savage twilight incidents where you eject parts of your psyche that are stopping you from reaching enlightenment. These parts take on physical form and become monsters which you can deal with in the physical realm. A tulpa is when this occurs on a social level, when so many people believe in a certain monster that that monster is created by their belief. I did try and sneak this idea into Ars Magica as the idea that there would be a shadow of Kriyaman, that the adulteration he left behind when he became the bridge into the Twilight Realm was collecting up other people's adulterations, and eventually it would be the Dark Lord that the player characters had to challenge. A modern take on the tulpa idea might be, say, the Slender Man. If enough people believe in him and talk about him, at what point does he become real? In Mythic Europe, he becomes real quite quickly. There are various methods of treatment for mania in Mythic Europe. A common one is exorcism, which works surprisingly well even if you don't have demons in you. In the same way that if the priest who is ordaining you isn't a particularly good man, God makes up the lack. So, similarly, if you have something that looks like a demonic possession and you are exorcised, the exorcism seems still to work, even if there is no demon there. That is, God makes up the lack in the ritual. In some parts of the world, and here I'm thinking particularly of Transylvania, there was something similar to an asylum where people who were affected by demonic contagions were kept imprisoned until their condition improved or they passed away. Taking care of such people was considered to be a charity, and one of the founders of such houses eventually became a Transylvanian saint, to whom an appeal could be made for intercession in the case of similar manias. There are also other alternatives. An attack on the Covenant could take the form of a contagious madness. An early Ars Magica supplement had a Covenant plagued by the dreams of a dragon about to hatch from its egg, deep beneath the Covenant. The Hysteria may be the result of a Twilight experience suffered by a resident magus who appears unaffected but acts as a carrier. It may be caused by poisoning, due to a residue of magical experiments getting into the Covenant's water supply, or the far less interesting, but realistic, ergotism, and it may signify that the Covenant's aura is uneven, and people working in one particular area have been warped to an unexpected degree. This may be the precursor of the eruption of a hidden regio.